Hi everyone, welcome to Type Talks. Today we're going to be talking about FI and its association with crying. And so you've all seen the memes about FI users. They'll be talking mid-sentence and then something will strike a chord in something they're saying. And then their eyes will tear up and get watery. And so we're here to discuss why that phenomenon exists and where it's coming from. And so Carol, would you like to enlighten us on the root causes of that?
Yes, I will give you this ENFP's understanding and experience of it. And I've actually got two men to give really good examples of this. So I've heard John Beebe talk about it. And John Beebe is the one who taught me this principle that the reason tears come with FI. And by the way, it's not just someone who has that as their dominant or auxiliary. Other people can go into FI, and FI goes to the tears place. And BB says because it's deep, it goes to values, and we really, even if that's not our judging function, FI goes deep. So when we go there, it strikes something very deep, and it touches us, and the tears come to the eye, and the voice can get shaky, and it's not controllable. And for example, when I was an officiant at a wedding this summer, and I was giving something. My person I was doing the wedding for had ENFJ preferences, and she had written the ceremony. And she had just beautiful leads with extroverted feeling, has a beautiful catalyst core. It was just gorgeous stuff, and it was very moving. I mean, I got through the first three sentences of the ceremony, and I looked, and the bride of the groom was struggling not to sob. So I thought, okay, no, excuse me. The father of the bride was struggling not to sob. So I thought, okay, I can't look at the family because the family's going to make me sob. But the way I got through this beautiful moving text is I practiced it over and over and over again because I had to get numb to it somewhat so it would not go to the FI place. I could still feel the importance of it and I still loved it. But when I first started practicing it, I couldn't get through it without crying. Well, it's very disconcerting to people in an audience when the person running the ceremony is in tears. So it's all right for eyes to get a little watery and people to see your move. That's actually can be quite effective as a speaker because those wateriness in your eyes actually touches people's hearts without them meaning for it to. That's okay, but you don't want to lose control with it. So I didn't want to lose control of my voice. So I practiced it over. I said you can't control it. One of the ways you manage it, you can manage it, is to practice something over and over. So by the time you do the moving thing in front of people, you're not crying as you do it. So that's how I got through a wedding ceremony back in July. As the officiant is I practice it over and over. So the tears come because you're going to a core heart place. So that's just like an automatic, that's like wiring, dear. Okay. That is wiring that makes that happen. I've got a couple of examples of men in my life that have this. I figured I don't want everybody thinking this is just, a woman thing. You want to say anything about this before I move on to the two male examples I have?
I definitely do. With FI, they don't just get moved at big events like a wedding. That is one of the places in which they can tear up. But I find that in my day-to-day interactions with FI users, or FPs particularly, so not necessarily the TJs so much that use FI, but my FP friends, they'll say something and then it'll instantaneously spark an emotional reaction of
Yes.
tears. And as a person on the outside looking at it, I can be a little bit shocked because I don't know what kind of value is being triggered at that moment to make them tear up. And so it's like this, it's almost like the emotion comes all at once.
Yes, it's boom, it's there. And they don't know it's coming either till it hits. And you're hoping you can get through it without it hitting, but when it hits, it hits. And you don't need to understand which value, but I think as someone who cares about them and who's listening, what you can know is they are telling you something that's deeply moving to them, and they're being authentic with you, and they're being vulnerable with you. So that's, I think, the message to someone who doesn't have that emotion, that is not in going into that function, that they're being transparent and they're being vulnerable with you and they're talking to you about something that's deeply moving.
Exactly. And this is one of the ways you can tell apart TPs from FPs, actually. So sometimes people have difficulty telling, am I an ENFP or am I an ENTP? Well, one of the small micro cues, this is just a data point, is if there are moments in conversations typically where you tear up mid-sentence because of an emotionally moving thing within that sentence.
Right.
Because I've had a lot of ENFPs, they'll start talking and then the tears will come out. Like they'll try not to cry, but
Right.
then everything, their body will start to viscerally react to
Yes.
sentences they're saying. Whereas I've never seen an ENTP or a TP type do that in front of me, unless like you really have to drive them to their breaking point for them to access their FI in that kind of way. But FPs will just casually cry when it comes up. I'm not saying that they cry all the time.
Casually, I wouldn't use the word casually. I would say they do it at unexpected times when they're talking with somebody they trust and they're going deep with you. It seems to come out of nowhere. I wouldn't use the word casual. It's spontaneous. I think the word is it just all of a sudden they're there and the tears are there.
Yeah, that's a much better way of putting it. Yeah, I incorrectly worded that. I guess the reason why I say casual is that they're more liberal with their crying than I see ENTPs. So,
Different universes, dear. And we're even more liberal with it than people with extroverted feeling preferences are. Because, and again, I go back to BB about the difference. FE is about monitoring it and moderating it so you don't upset anyone and so you don't contribute to something that will be disruptive. And so it seems to me that FE feels deeply, but your expressing of that is regulated and is tapped down, as BB would say. He said people think all the expressive stuff is FE. It's not. It's someone with FI who's not holding back their FE exuberance, which I think is ENFP all over the place. Because I remember I don't have the command of FE that you do. I live in FI. It's not that I can't go there and do thoughtful things for people, but this business about being more exuberant, that's about being FI instead of FE because I'm not using that FE skill to moderate it better.
absolutely. And so I would love to hear your stories of the FP men in your life.
Got it. I have a grandfather had ESFP preferences, and he was like a poster child for ESFP. He had this great big smile. He was a jolly man that said when he was younger that he could charm birds out of trees. I mean, he was just this gregarious, friendly guy. And why I'm sharing with you about him is because I saw this FI move to tears things in him. And I'm from the deep South where, men are manly men and men don't just go around showing tears. And my grandfather worked for the railroad. He shoveled coal into an engine. He later became an engineer. So this is a very, blue collar union member, manly guy who would do the FI thing when something moved him. And at his funeral, I remember one of his friends, his rather gruff friend, said, "Yeah, Coy." His name was Coy, COI. He said, "Yeah, Coy had a tender heart." And his friends seemed to accept this in him, which I thought was big-hearted of them. Nobody seemed to make fun of my grandfather for doing this. Maybe when he was a boy, somebody did, but as a man, his friends seemed to accept it. Coy is just tender-hearted, and that happens. At the I would go to church with him when I visited after my step grandmother died, and so somebody would say, "Oh, how you doing?" And he would start okay, and then he'd been married to this woman for 40 years, right? So the tears would start, and it would hit his voice, and he'd tear. And I looked at these people's faces, and oh my God, they were just frozen. It's like, oh my God, a man is crying. What are we going to do? And then it would just last for a few seconds, maybe 5 or 10 seconds. And then he got his voice back and he was fine. And he ended the conversation just fine. But it would erupt because it was the love of his life, right? So he would get to that place about Ruth being dead and gone. The tears in the voice thing would happen. And then he would get through it in a matter of seconds. and he was okay. And everybody just ignored it and just acted like it didn't happen. But and I'm like this because because I'm about to cry too out of resonance with him, right? But it was really sweet. He was this big-hearted, what I call a teddy bear man, an ESFP guy. He was just a darling person. Everybody loved my grandfather. And learning about FI from John Beebe, I get it. That's what I was seeing with my grandfather. This manly man who worked for the railroad. It type overrules the manly man thing.
It's cute how people around you accepted that part of him. It's a sweet thing to be remembered for
Yeah.
having a soft heart.
And thank you for saying that. It was very sweet to see people being accepting of it. They would, oh gosh, I'm getting moved by now. They would give him time to, regain control of himself. And then everybody just acted like nothing happened. And that was, the Southern polite way to handle that. And they did it. So, yes, it was sweet to see people being kind to him about it.
Yeah. And so FP men might feel a little different than other men because they might have this quality that people might traditionally associate with more feminine traits of having that tender heart. It's sweet to have more sensitive men. I think that is super attractive in a person. And
Right.
so, Carol, I'm wondering about your other example.
Yes, this is very cool. This is from the type world itself. I studied with and worked for at one time Bob McAlpin, who was the CEO and owner of Type Resources, and for about 20 years he actually went around qualifying people in type. So Bob was, really up in the field, very very serious person in the type world, and he was retired military. He had flown an armed helicopter in Vietnam, which means this guy's a combat veteran. Okay, he's not just I served veteran. He was a guy who did combat in Vietnam. He came back to the States. He taught leadership development. Finished out his career in Louisville, Kentucky, teaching leadership development on an army base to officers, to leaders, and for all I know, frontline people too. But he talked about, I heard him once in a class talking about, and he had ISTJ preferences, which is the modal type for, at least in the US, the modal type for the military. So, military, army, that's his world because he's the kind of guy running that world. And FI is for ISTJ and INTJ. FI is that third function, which BB says always maintains something of a childlike. I'm not saying childish, but a childlike quality. And it's if it's tender for me, it's even more. He was talking about the reason in the military you go back and you hit that extroverted thinking very hard is that if something touches you and you start to go into introverted feeling, that's a very scary place, and that's a vulnerable place, and that's the last place you want to be as a military man. So you push yourself away from it and you just make extroverted thinking even harder because you dare not go to that place. And I have seen him in a setting being totally vulnerable and open with us, get the tears in his eyes and the shaky voice talking about something that was very moving. And, this is a guy who flew an armed helicopter in a war. For him to talk about that so openly, that it's such a vulnerable place, you just fight and claw your way back from it so you don't go there and you don't feel the vulnerability of it. I thought that was very brave of him to explain that to us one day.
That's super moving. What was his type again?
ISTJ.
Okay.
Art the core stabilizer, the modal type of the U.S. military. I don't know if this is still true, but about 10 years ago, I was told by a colleague that the organization that has the largest MBTI database in the world is the U.S. military. And I asked her, I said, help me understand that because I know what the type spread is, and they're like some of the last people to think this stuff is anything but voodoo and nonsense. And she laughed and she said one word, Carol: teamwork. If you don't work as a team in the military, people actually can die. So the military gets it, that understanding how people are different so you can communicate effectively with them. And I thought, well, that makes total sense, but it is really against their type preferences that they're open to it and realize this is a real thing.
Yeah,
corporate America, nobody dies. As usually is a rule, nobody dies when we don't communicate well. Bad things happen, but in the military, it's very serious when miscommunications happen. So I appreciated her turning a light on that for me. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I would never have expected that the military is a popular place for MBTI to be used. Thank you, Carol, for all of your wisdom on FI and how it can create emotional waterworks, because it can be linked to the heart of a value within a person, the heart of values. And so it can cause an in the moment resonance that's very intense, that it even manifests physiologically in the body. Of course, we all have FI in us, and so we're capable of doing this. But I noticed this reaction especially prevalent within FPs, and even more so in ENFPs and ESFPs. And so if you like this video, feel free to check out the APTI Fall Conference. Carol, would you like to tell us a little bit about it?
Oh, yeah, thanks. This is the fall conference, and it's called Type for Facilitating Personal Change, and it's specifically geared for coaches and counselors and therapists. And all the presentations are geared for that. So I think a lot of people who listen to you would enjoy it. We have Eve DeLunas, Dario Nardi, Roger Pierman, Sharon Lavoie, and these are all people who have a different and special perspective to add to how to use these models in our head to really be impactful in a one-on-one session with a client.
Sounds like wonderful stuff for this type enthusiastic audience. And so thank you everyone for watching. I'll see you all in the next episode.